Hello, Canucks fans, and welcome back to another episode of Canucks Conversation, brought to you as always by the 2024 Toyota BZ4X. The BZ4X is Toyota's brand new all-electric SUV designed to go the distance for you and your family. The BZ4X is packed with Toyota's coolest tech, but it still has that trusty SUV feel you know and love, and even though it's electric, it's capable of effortlessly conquering any terrain, whether it's rain, snow, mud, or your friends' questionable post-game recaps. The BZ4X will get you through it all. Folks, we are officially kicking the can down the road. We are not going to do an off-season preview show today because we've got some actual news to talk about. And I forgot to update the bars at the bottom, so that's my apologies, Grady, for that. But Manny Malhotra is the new coach of the Abbotsford Canucks. Dave Gurgelli, and there's my co-host, Harman Dial. We're going to talk about it while I fix my mic.
Yeah, so I think considering the circumstances, this is a great hire for the Vancouver Canucks. Of course, with Jeremy Colleton, he did a terrific job in Abbotsford. But as was sort of rumored, they couldn't really come to terms on an extension. He was Elliotte Friedman, as he reported, looking at potential NHL opportunities. And it makes sense, right? He has a strong resume. Jeremy Colleton has options. He's in demand. So the Canucks had to be ready to pivot. And I think this is a great option. Malhotra, of course, has the local ties of being a player here, familiarity with the market. He was an assistant coach with Travis Green from 2017 to 2020, I believe it was. Then moved on to Toronto to join Sheldon Keefe's staff. He had an excellent reputation through it all in hockey circles with his communication skills, his teaching style, his composure, his demeanor. I also think that considering how large of a role the Sedins play in Abbotsford, development-wise, I'm sure that they would have had some input, some insight into Malhotra's potential as a coach and would have vouched for him to have gotten this opportunity. Malhotra's never been a head coach at the professional level, so that's going to be a fascinating adjustment. But I have all the faith that he's intelligent enough, hardworking enough, and strong enough of a communicator to have success down there in Abbotsford.
I'm just hoping that he becomes a friend of the show, like Jeremy Colleton was. It's not a going to move on to do great things. Of course, we wish all the best to Jeremy Colleton. He was great every time we had him on the show, and I'm looking forward to having Manny Malhotra because we get the Abbotsford coach on this show. It's a tradition talking to the Abbotsford Canucks head coach. Malhotra, obviously familiar with the organization, and Patrick Allvin touched on that in the press release that the Canucks put out announcing the hiring. This is what Allvin had to say. Bringing in someone familiar with the organization is a big win for us. Manny's experience in hockey development and coaching has prepared him really well for this head coaching opportunity. We look forward to working with him and providing our staff in Abbotsford all the support they need to continue to develop our players. Abbotsford Canucks GM Ryan Johnson thanked Jeremy Colleton and Gary Agnew, another coach who had every player we talked to had really good things to say about both of these gentlemen. So he thanked them, and then he talked about bringing in Manny. Having played against Manny in the NHL, I know firsthand many of the great qualities he possesses and the competitiveness in his DNA. He is a teacher first, in his skill set and mindset will fit in perfectly with our vision for the team in Abbotsford. So again, all the best to Colleton and Gary Agnew, and excited that Manny Malhotra is the guy coming in. Irfan Gaffar tweeted this out, that Malhotra's son is going to be playing for the Chilliwack Chiefs of the BCHL. So I do like Manny, but I do question why he's not playing for the Coquitlam Express. So I'll just say that.
Maybe you'll have to ask him when we eventually talk.
That'll be my first question. Yeah, that'll be my first question.
Hitting journalism.
Yeah, exactly. Why not the Coquitlam Express? What was it, Manny? Tell us. But anyways, yes, of course. So Manny Malhotra comes in and is he's the third coach of the Abbotsford Canucks, right? Because it was Trent Cull first year, then it was Colleton. Now it's I got that right. Third head coach of the Abbotsford Canucks.
I can't remember if Cull. I can't remember exactly what year Utica officially changed or officially moved to Abbotsford. I think he did. I think he did.
I think it's Cull because I have the image burned in my head of Jim Benning standing with Francesco Aquilini at the Abbotsford Center. Do you remember that? Like, do you remember this photo?
Yeah,
I
think so.
Burned in my memory. So if that timeline lines up, and obviously Cull.
Yeah, you're right. You are right.
Okay, so it was Cull. So third head coach again, I wanted to just mention it and move on, and it ended up turning into a discussion about how many head coaches the Abbotsford Canucks have had. But yes, that's the news of the day. We have some actual news. So we are, like I said, we're pushing away our off-season preview until next week, it looks like. So yeah, we had some actual news to talk about, and we're expecting to hear from Malhotra soon. Hey, maybe we'll get him on the pod sometime soon, but not today. Not today for Manny Malhotra. But let's get to our, I don't want to call it the big news of the day. It was going to be the big news of the day. Obviously, Manny getting hired leads off the show. But one thing we're going to talk about today is a couple of players in the Carolina Hurricanes organization that the Canucks have been linked to in the past, and season just ended, Harm. The Canucks are linked once again to Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Martin Necas. This segment is brought to you by our friends over at Wendy's. Frozen pucks are awesome when they're in the back of the other guy's net, but that doesn't mean you'd want to eat one. And that's why Wendy's only ever uses fresh Canadian beef that's never seen the inside of a freezer in all of their burgers. Whether you order a Baconator, Dave Single, or even a JBC, you'll only ever find real fresh beef that's juicy and loaded with fresh toppings. Download the Wendy's app, check out the latest deals, and order a burger that's only job is being delicious. Okay, Harm. Kotkaniemi, Martin Necas. I will give the listeners the context of why we're talking about this, and then I'm going to lean heavily, like I do for most player analysis, I'm going to lean heavily on you for this when it comes to Kotkaniemi and when it comes to Martin Necas. Starting with Kotkaniemi, because this was on Friday's edition of the 32 Thoughts podcast with Elliotte Friedman. Both of these nuggets come from Friedman, talking about how Kotkaniemi is a player that the Hurricanes don't plan on buying out this offseason. And he also said the Canucks might be one of the organizations on top of the Hurricanes that likes Kotkaniemi. We've heard him linked to the Canucks in the past. 23-year-old. Let's focus just on him so far, and then I'll talk about Necas after. Let's just focus on Kotkaniemi right now.
Sure, this will be shorter just because I am way more excited about Necas than I am about Kotkaniemi, so I have a lot more like Necas takes. But in the case of Kotkaniemi, when they signed him to an offer sheet, I'm sure that they anticipated him being this middle six stalwart center. He's shown flashes of that ability, but hasn't been able to really take the next step. Now, Kotkaniemi, I anticipate that there's going to be some market for him around the NHL just because he is still so young. He still has pedigree. He also has the type of like large physical frame and baseline defensive reliability that when you combine it with even though his offensive production hasn't hit his potential yet, like this is a player that at the end of last season, for example, put up 41 points, I believe it was. Like there's something there. It's just a matter of he's not worth $4.8 million right now. So do you think he can grow into that type of cap hit? Now, for me, from the Canucks perspective, I'd probably be staying away just because, sure, I'd feel confident in Kotkaniemi being a perfectly serviceable third line center, but just not at that cap hit, right? Just not at nearly $5 million when you're already leaning on potentially Connor Garland, who makes nearly $5 million to be the main play driver. If you're spending nearly $5 million on a third line center, that guy better be elite. And Kotkaniemi, maybe he gets there, but he's not there right now. He's coming off a down year. I believe he only had 27 points. His role was reduced, right? I believe he averaged 12 minutes a night this season. But put it this way, if the Canucks bet on him, I'm not going to come out swinging and just criticizing management for it, because at the end of the 2022-23 season, for example, he had a stretch where he finished with, I think it was 26 points in his last 33 games. And so a lot of people saw that and went, okay, like this guy might finally take the step and not just be a high-end third line center, but maybe he can be a serviceable enough second line center. Now, didn't happen this year. That's probably why now they're looking at their cap situation. Carolina has a bunch of free agents and they're going, well, maybe we need to shed some cap space here. I wouldn't be too keen on it if I was the Canucks, though.
Yeah, so you kind of touched on it. One thing we're obviously going to talk about when it comes to Necas and Kotkaniemi is the obvious question. Whenever trade talks happen, you always ask, okay, well, why do they want to get rid of this player? But we'll save that. We'll talk about that and the reason Carolina would want to maybe move on from either of these guys afterwards. But on Kotkaniemi, yeah, 12 goals, 15 assists through 79 games. He is signed for the next 5 years at $4.82 million. The one thing I thought about though is like, what is a third line center going to get paid by the time his deal is up? And I'm not trying to, I don't want to go too far down the road. I'm just saying, obviously, the cap is going up. We know that. And it feels like if the Canucks are going after him and they've liked him in the past, it feels like they've clearly done their homework on this player and they have a reason to like him, whether that is that they think he'll fit really well in their system. But I agree with you. The player that I'm more excited about is Martin Necas, and we'll circle back on Kotkaniemi. We'll talk about both of them. But
the other thing too is like if you're trading from, you're banking on a breakout, right? So you're not trading for the player that Kotkaniemi is right now. You're trading for him for the potential of what he could be. Whereas with Necas, the reason you're targeting him is like you already know that he's a proven top 6 forward. Plus, I'll also mention with Kotkaniemi, like if he was a high-end penalty killer, I'd be like, okay, like even though the offensive potential hasn't hit yet, like I wouldn't mind them rolling the dice on him as a long-term answer there. Because as you mentioned, the cap is going to go up and he really has a chance to grow into this cap hit, but hasn't killed penalties very often in Carolina. And if you're going to be a third line center, and especially more of a two-way type, that to me is an important box that I want a player to be checking.
Okay, so with Necas, the reason he's in trade talks is because his dad said that he wanted to be traded, which is awesome. Like, I love that. His dad comes out in a Czech interview and says, yeah, it's time for him to be traded. It really doesn't sound like this is going to be a player that spends more time in Carolina. He's a restricted free agent. He's obviously going to need a new contract, and it really doesn't sound like he wants to stay in Carolina. Obviously has some power as an RFA, but that's simply put, that's the reason that the Carolina Hurricanes would be looking to trade a player like Martin Necas. What can you tell us about this player, Harm?
Well, it's not even just that he may be looking for a fresh start. It's that Carolina is facing a cap crunch this offseason. They've got, according to Cap Friendly, around $27 million in cap space. And I don't want to bore people with the details, but the context here will inform what Carolina is potentially looking for in a trade. So it's important to walk through. So they have around $27 million in cap space. They really want to re-sign Jake Guentzel because he was a terrific fit for them. Now, you look at what Guentzel might cost. We threw around a cap hit potentially starting with the number 9, but Pierre LeBrun had some reporting today over at The Athletic and was wondering if 8x8 might get it done, which on the lower end of what I thought Guentzel would earn. But let's just assume for argument's sake that the Canes are able to re-sign him at $8 million.
Also worth mentioning with this new CBA, obviously, and I guess it's not that new, but like the Carolina Hurricanes are the only team that can sign hhim to an 8-year deal, right? Like he can only sign 7 years in free agency. So even if it's an 8x8, that's still more total money than 9x7 or whatever, right?
Yeah, I think with 9x7 it'd be the same though, wouldn't it? Or no,
it'd be like
no,
1
you're
million
right.
less.
Yeah, you're right. Anyway, so let's say it's $8 million for Guentzel. Clearly, mental math is not my strength.
Oh, same here. I thought you were right for a second there.
No. Then let's say like they have their entire second pair of Shea and Pesce both becoming unrestricted free agents. It sounds like Pesce is the more likely one to walk. Shea has had a terrific year. They've got Orlov as potential insurance to step up into a top 4 role, but I can't imagine that they're going to let both guys just go. Like they need another proven top 4 defenseman, even though they've got prospects like Scott Morrow's coming. They've got that Russian defenseman out of the KHL, really high-end prospect, Nikishin. There's question marks about whether he'll come in. So they have some talent, but imagine they want to keep one of those guys. So let's say for argument's sake, Shea costs $6.5 million. Seth Jarvis is also an RFA. For argument's sake, let's say his number is around $7 million, right? At that point, and these are very like rough, like without having done a ton of research on these cap hits, But in that scenario, Carolina would have $5.5 million in cap space left with only 11 forwards and 6 defensemen signed, plus their goalies. That's not enough to fill out their depth spots and then sign Necas on top of that, given how productive he's been, because Necas also has arbitration rights. So that's, from a cap perspective, why they probably can't afford his next deal. I mean, sure, could they move around Kotkaniemi and move heaven and earth to find a way to make Necas and make a Necas extension work? Sure, but the easier path for them is probably to cash in on his trade value. The reason I walk through all of that is, as we discuss, okay, well, what might Carolina be interested in? You have to keep in mind that because they want to keep Gensel, because they have needs to address on the back end, that they are probably going to want to make the type of trade where they gain cap space, unless the piece that you're giving back is like a core guy that they would really want on, let's say, their blue line or their forward group.
Okay. I got a text during the show. And I got to say it because it's from one of our Finnish friends who covers the NHL, and he said, "Don't know if you look at your DMs during the show. I do, but Kotkaniemi loves Vancouver. It's his favorite road city. I remember speaking about it last year." So just interesting little nugget that I had to share, and I already asked if I could share it, and he said yes. So yeah, shout out to him. Shout out to him for sending me that. But with Kotkaniemi and Necas, can we pull up this trade proposal thing that I had for you, Grady? It was from Malcolm on Twitter, our pal Malcolm. Harmon, I threw this to you too. I texted it to you. And I know what your takeaway from it is. And I know Carolina probably says no, but for those on the podcast, I'll read it. To Carolina, Filip Hronek, don't have to do media in Carolina, Nils Höglander, Ilya Mikheyev, and to Vancouver, Martin Necas, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and Scott Morrow. Scott Morrow, obviously the right shot blue liner that Faber was a huge fan of ahead of that draft. So those 3 players coming back to Vancouver, you get rid of Hronek, Höglander, and Mikheyev. The Canes have obviously been interested in Höglander in the past. I guess the question for you, Harm, other than breaking down this trade as a whole, how interested would the Carolina Hurricanes be in Filip Hronek?
That's $1 million question, right? I don't know, because that proposal you outlined to me, if I'm Carolina, that doesn't make a lot of sense because of the amount of salary you're taking back. Like, as a contending team, why would they want Ilya Mikheyev, right? Mikheyev has no finishing ability whatsoever. And if there's one attribute that Carolina doesn't need on their roster, it's more fast guys that don't know how to finish, right? Like, they're filled with players that drive possession, drive play, create chances, but suck at finishing. Like, they need more finishers, if anything. So, like, because you're taking on like Hronek, his potential extension as well, Mikheyev's deal, like, that's a lot of salary to take back. I don't think it makes sense from that perspective. However, the Hronek angle will be interesting. Again, just because his contract demands are so high, like, my initial thought is I don't suspect that they'd have a ton of interest in him. But in having said that, they do need to solve their or make decisions on the back end. Only got 3 top 4 defensemen essentially signed when you think of Slavin, Burns, and Orlov presumably moving up. So they need a defenseman. It's just how much do they like Hronek compared to Pesci, compared to Shea, compared to some of the other options that they have. The other thing to keep in mind is Don Waddell just resigned from his position as general manager of the Carolina Hurricanes. Eric Tulsky is taking over as the interim GM. Can the Canes even make these types of decisions before they have clarity on their front office situation? Right? Like, how much power does Tulsky have right now? Especially because Tom Dundon, the owner of the Hurricanes, is a notoriously involved owner, right? He is probably one of the most active owners in the NHL. A lot of it comes down to him as well. And who knows what Tom Dundon thinks is in all of this as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I always try to tap into the mind of the owners, but I don't know. Like, you're right. You're right. It might not be something that's imminent, but it is interesting to hear these 2 names thrown out so early, I guess, into the Canucks off season. And I'm interested. I'm interested, man. Like, I'll be honest with you. Marty Necas especially seems like a really good fit on this team. And I don't know. Like, it's like I said earlier, if they go out and get Kotkaniemi, you're just thinking, okay, well, clearly they like this player. Clearly they think that a breakout is imminent and that they can do something. Back on that trade proposal, though, owner Quads took a look at what picks the Canucks have. Throw a first, throw a second, whatever you got to do, get it done. I like that trade. I say it every show.
I mean, yeah, it gets a lot done for the Canucks.
It gets so much done. Like, get rid of your first, get rid of your second. Who cares? Maybe both, and then get something else back. Like Scott Morrow, like we didn't even really touch on the Scott Morrow aspect of this. Has he like fallen off in recent years? Because I remember really liking him when I saw him.
I haven't tracked him too closely, but I still think he's on track to being a solid NHL defenseman.
Nah, I think you do that trade immediately.
Like, but even if you add picks, like, again, it's about cap space, right? Like Carolina, like, why would they take on bad money just because you give them picks? Like, they're trying to win a Stanley Cup now.
You
know what I mean?
True. Yeah.
So the other thing to keep in mind is the Canucks can get this done even if they aren't even if Carolina isn't necessarily enthused about the idea of Filip Hronek.
And that's the question we have in the chat from Shiv right here. Is there any chance they can get Necas without Hronek involved?
For sure. And this is where Nils Höglander would be a really valuable trade chip, right? Because it's not just what he is as a player, it's that he makes $1.1 million against the cap. To have that type of middle six player who's that young, the speed, the tenacity, like I could easily see Carolina having a lot of interest in a player like that. Now, of course, that's also the reason why the Canucks would want to hold on to Höglander. But if you're going to make a trade for a proven high-end top six player like Necas, who's in the prime of his career in his mid-20s, you're going to have to give to get. And this is where the Canucks would have to decide, do we want to part ways and make a piece like Höglander the centerpiece, or one of your A-grade prospects like a Karamaki, like a Tom Willander? And even then, it also comes down to, what does Carolina prefer? Because maybe they don't want a top prospect. Maybe they want a guy that can slide into the lineup right away, like Höglander. This is also where it'll be an interesting discussion with Höglander as a whole, because keep in mind that at the end of next season, he's an arbitration eligible RFA. So he's going to be in line for a significant raise. If the Canucks have any doubts about wanting to give him a substantial contract extension next summer, which, I mean, I wouldn't be worried about, but you look at how he still hasn't fully gained the trust of Rick Tocchet, right? Only averaged 10 minutes a night in the playoffs, only averaged 12 minutes a night in the regular season. Like, if this management regime or coaching staff has any reservations, like, now would be the time to cash in on him as a premium trade chip to get yourself a high-end top six player.
There's another reason that you might want to move off Nils Höglander, and that was the shooting percentage. What did he shoot this year? What was his shooting percentage?
I think it was above 20%.
Really high. Like, and I don't want to just start get Höglander out thing, but if there was anything we may have learned from Andrei Kuzmenko, it's that Höglander fits a very similar profile to Andrei Kuzmenko's first season in Vancouver. Played a lot with Elias Pettersson, put up solid numbers, shot exactly 20%. Like, that's the lesson, right? Is that maybe that's not going to be repeatable for Nils Höglander. And if you have a team like Carolina who has been interested in Höglander in the past, even before this season that they saw from him, that they've now seen him score 24 goals, that would be a reason, I think, for the Canucks to be saying, okay, if we can get a good player back, we're okay with parting ways for this player. And we saw that shooting percentage just dip in the playoffs, obviously.
Höglander is in a different boat than Kuzmenko, though, just because, for many reasons. But
yeah, for sure.
The biggest one, arguably, being the lack of opportunity, right? Kuzmenko's a player that averaged a ton of minutes, had power play one opportunity. Höglander put up 24 goals without getting basically any power play time. To do that while averaging 12 minutes a night is basically unheard of, right?
Yeah.
So
all even strength, all of his 24 goals were even
even if he takes a step back next season, right? If he's number one, if you give him a bigger opportunity, give him more minutes, that can offset, opportunity can offset efficiency, right? Because if a guy's playing more, getting more shots, getting more chances, he could shoot, let's say, somewhere in the teens in terms of his shooting percentage. And just because he's playing more, getting more opportunities, because he's earned that opportunity, he may not have a huge drop off in his production. Now, number two, even if he does take a step back, you're still talking about a player that could get you, I think, 15 to 20 goals pretty easily, most of them being at even strength, while also being a legit play driver, being a guy that gets in on the forecheck, creates chances for himself, helps drive a line. And the key is, again, at $1.1 million, right? So there's enormous value in that. So this isn't, they should definitely sell high, because I'm a believer in Höglander's game, even if his shooting percentage regresses. I think given his cap hit, he's ultra valuable, but it's just not a guarantee that he's going to be back with the Canucks, especially if it entails a possibility to go out and land a player of Necas' quality.
Okay, we're going to get to our poll question and continue this conversation. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Four Winds Brewing, more specifically about their Featherweight IPA. If you're looking for a nice hoppy beer but still want something light and flavorful, then look no further than the Four Winds Featherweight IPA. At just 4.5%, this incredibly light IPA is packed full of tropical and citrusy goodness. Available now at liquor stores across BC or through the Four Winds online shop for home delivery anywhere in BC at fourwindsbrewing.ca. All right, Harm. I asked the people answered. It's time for our poll question, which is brought to you as always by Mr. Lube. Here it is, folks. Pull it up, Grady. There it is. Today's poll question: should the Canucks be interested in Carolina's Jesperi Kotkaniemi and Martin Necas? The options were yes, both, just Necas, just Kotkaniemi, and no, neither of them. Over 900 votes, leading the way with 67.9% of the vote is just Martin Necas. 21.6% of people say yes, both players. 1.6% say just Kotkaniemi, and 8.9% of people say no, neither of them. I'm probably somewhere between those two top answers. I'm saying just Martin Necas if I have to pick one, but I also am not opposed to the idea of both if this team believes in both. If this team's pro scouting that hasn't hurt me much in the past, if they believe in Kotkaniemi and they believe in a breakout year, I'm not going to sit here. And it's like you said earlier, you're not going to come out swinging and poke a bunch of holes in it. We want to see what he would do in a Canucks uniform if the Canucks think that's the move.
Yeah, but make no mistake about it. I am a way bigger fan of Necas than I am Kotkaniemi. Let's talk about him a little bit more, right? So you look through the type of player that he is, type of player that he is, there's a ton of speed, right? Yesterday, Patrick Allvin spoke about wanting to add top six help and speed. That's literally Necas. His skating ability, the dynamic skill that he has. He's a player that would add definite creativity. He's also improved a lot as a goal scorer over the last couple of seasons. He had 24 goals this year. He had 28 goals last season. And that's important from the perspective of, okay, if you're going to be Elias Pettersson's running it, you got to be able to bury chances. He's grown a lot in that capacity. You also go through the numbers. He's been a player that has oscillated a little bit in terms of his production, always top six caliber, but just how high he's reached has fluctuated a little bit. So like this year, for example, 53 points, but the year before that, his career best, 28 goals and 71 points. The year before that, he had 40 points in 78 games. And then the year before that, he had 41 points in 53 games in the COVID shortened 56 game season. So if he can be a player that, like, his range is somewhere between, and obviously hinges on power play opportunity, who he plays with, etc. But you're talking about a player that's realistically somewhere going to be between like the 50 to 65 point range, maybe pushing 70 again if everything clicks. As a player, stylistically, I think he's a great fit. He has also put on size, right? Like when he was initially drafted, he was drafted as a center. Don't think he can really play center based off his defensive game, but he's beefed up. Like he was really skinny, kind of wiry, a little bit similar to Pettersson that way. And I remember at times watching him last season when he was at his best, and I was like, man, this guy's a lot more assertive in puck battles. He's not just a pushover along the walls. Plus, the other thing to keep in mind is he played under Rod Brind'Amour. So when you talk about systems-wise moving to Vancouver, the Canucks, X's and O's, there might be differences compared to Carolina, but philosophically, Carolina and Vancouver are pretty similar in that it's defense first. It's high pressure. You got to win your battles. You have to be responsible in your own end. Like, you're not cheating for offense, and a lot of those principles, considering how much playoff hockey he's been in, that helps give me confidence that, okay, this isn't just a flashy guy that puts up points, but won't actually be a fit with the way Rick Tocchet wants to play. I have confidence that he'd be a fit in Vancouver.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on Kotkaniemi, just another thing on Kotkaniemi. He had that mix-up, remember, with Elias Pettersson, where Elias Pettersson suffered a leg injury?
Yeah, sure. I remember that, but
Had to bring
okay.
it up. Had to bring it up because, hey, it's going to be talked about. It's going to be talked about. I just need to be the first to talk about it. I need to bring it up. Okay. And there was something else I want to say, but I can't remember what it was. So I'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at
One
that.
more
Oh, no.
thing.
This is the last thing. Well, you can have another last thing, but this is one thing I wanted to mention. I saw this on Twitter a lot. People say, well, if they get Kotkaniemi, they got to, the Canes have to retain on it. I don't think that's happening. They ain't retaining
No,
on a deal
don't think
that
so.
has 5 years left on it. No. And hey, Kotkaniemi at 50% retained, 25% retained, or whatever. That's a great deal for the Canucks. That ain't happening. That's not
Tom
happening.
Dundon isn't going to retain salary.
No,
I'll tell you that much.
exactly.
There's
That's
no
not happening.
chance.
Yeah, that's not happening. Just putting it out there now. Okay, sorry. You had one last thing you want to say.
Yeah, just from the perspective of gauging the market value of what it would cost for a player like Necas, there are a couple of comps that come to mind. This isn't like a full deep dive, but just looking at RFAs in their mid 20s that had arbitration rights that were semi close to unrestricted free agency, but obviously not there yet. Like, what did they go for? Top 6 wingers. The best comp I can think of is Sam Reinhart when he was first dealt from Buffalo to Florida. Obviously, he's become a way better player in Florida. He's broken out. But you look at his profile before then. At the time he was traded, this is a guy that, again, points wise, fluctuated in a very similar range as Necas. The year that he was dealt, he had 25 goals and 40 points in 54 games. The year before that, 50 points in 69 games. The year before that, 65 and 82. So Reinhart, production-wise, was very similar to Necas there. Of course, similar in terms of age and both wanting to get paid on a big new contract. It cost Florida a first-round pick in Devin Levi, who's become a pretty good goaltending prospect. At the time, was probably more of a B grade prospect because he was initially a 7th round pick, but then he had this outstanding NCAA campaign where his stock shot through the roof. So you look there, and basically it comes down to first round pick and B grade prospect, and it actually kind of aligns with what Kevin Fiala, who was also in a similar boat as a mid-20s RFA when Minnesota couldn't afford him. What he went for. He went for a first-round pick of Brock Faber. And, of course, Faber is a borderline number 1 defenseman right now. But at the time, nobody thought he had that potential. Faber at the time was like a high B grade prospect maybe. And Minnesota got from LA a first-round pick. And Faber probably wouldn't cost quite as much for Necas just because Fiala was coming off an 85-point season. But that's kind of the range that you're looking at market value wise. If you were to look in terms of futures, would be a first round pick and like a B grade prospect. And of course, a player like Höglander could be the centerpiece instead of that first round pick.
Yeah. And I mean, hey, those were late first round picks too, right? Like, wasn't it the 28th or 20? It was like mid to late 20s was the one that Buffalo sent over, right?
The one that Florida sent over. Yeah, I believe so.
I gotta find it. I gotta find it. Yeah, Yuri Kulich. So they took 28th overall pick. Yeah, 28th overall pick in that Sam Reinhart trade. So good comps, Harmon. I didn't even think of doing that. So good for you. Good for you for thinking of that. I'm glad we got that in. Getting it some actual trade comparables, because that's always the question we always ask: is what's it going to cost to get a player? And I think if that's the price, if you're the Canucks, I think you're rushing to do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, the key here again is that I see Necas as a player that can fit long term, and I think his down season, quote unquote down season with 53 points, could be a feature rather than a bug. What I mean by that is you're getting his next contract right now for cheaper compared to if he was coming off a 71.28 goal season. So yeah, I mean, the key is he be a long-term fit in his mid-20s as opposed to, look, there are going to be trade options out there where guys on the market, but he's in his late 20s. He maybe only has a year or two left on his contract, and he's not actually going to be part of your core. You acquire Necas, and he's part of your core. Whereas you don't want to be in the business of, like, yeah, once in a while you can make some deals where you push for an Elias Lindholm as a rental, but you can't do that every year. At some point, you got to take your most valuable assets and find a guy that's going to be a long-term fit for your team. And clearly the Canucks, when you look at their forward lineup right now, right, in terms of bona fide, no doubt about it, top six forwards, they've got JT Miller, they've got Elias Pettersson, they've got Brock Besser, and maybe Connor Garland, right? On true talent, I think he's a top six forward. Of course, spent a lot of time on the third line. So you got what, 3.5 top six forwards? It's not enough.
No, it's not enough. I like that thinking. Like, I like that thought process because, obviously owner quads doesn't care about first round picks and doesn't care about assets, but that idea of using your assets, like you just brought up how Florida made the Reinhart trade, how LA made the Fiala trade. Like, that's where the Canucks are at now, is they need to make a trade like this. Like, they got to use some future assets, and obviously picks don't matter. They have to make that trade to go out and get that player that's going to fit long term. I like that, Harm. I like that a lot. This turned into a better conversation.
Again, this is also where, like, to me, this management needs to know how much faith and conviction they have in Höglander this summer. It has to be this summer because, again, you don't want to end up in a scenario where if you, let's say hypothetically, you don't have faith in him, right? You think this was maybe a year where everything went right and his production is going to taper off, think that his shooting percentage is going to regress, or that you simply don't want to pay him at the end of next season when he's an RFA with ARP rights. There's no point letting that drag out, getting to next offseason and being like, well, crap, we like Höglander, but we don't like him at the number that it's going to cost to keep him. Let's move him now. Like, at that point, it's too late. It's too late. Like, this upcoming season, when Höglander makes $1.1 million, is going to be his most valuable, both to the Canucks and to another contender. If you're ever going to even consider the prospect of using him as a trade chip, it's now. It's not later. It's and so now, of course, you also may just look at him and go, we like Höglander's long-term fit. We believe in his potential. Look at the year that he just had. We're in on him, and that's totally fine. But, like, you got to know that. You can't be wishy-washy and think, oh, we'll just kick the can down the road and we're not convinced, but we've got time.
Yeah, that's the thing. You don't have that time. Like, you don't. And I mean, yeah, I love it. I love it, dude. I love it. And I mean,
because again, if you're able to then pull off a trade where he's the centerpiece, then you can save your 2025 first round pick. Now that's another asset that you can use down the road, or maybe even keep for yourself, right? Because look at Dallas, right? They went out and they draft guys like Johnston, Harley, Stankoven was in the second round, but these guys then on their ELC make such a substantial impact. You don't just want to throw your first round picks around willy-nilly. Like, if you can avoid it and use other pieces, it's probably better. But again, this is where the Canucks have to sort of make their decision. And I know around the time of the trade deadline, we were like, don't want to move Höglander. But again, remember that the conversation at the time was around older players that weren't going to be long-term fits in all likelihood. Like, it would have been maybe for a guy like a Lindholm, or maybe a player like Pavel Buchnevich, who only had 1 year left after this past season. And again, even in a proposal like that, it would have been Höglander plus, right? So different conversation now in the offseason. Again, I'm not advocating that they move him, but just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, something to keep in mind. Okay, and that was our poll question, brought to you by Mr. Lube. Need a tire change or tire service? Mr. Lube provides no appointment tire service and sales. Drop by anytime for tire rotation, tire repair, and balancing. Servicing all makes and models, including electric vehicles. Find them at one of their 16 locations in the Lower Mainland. For one near you, go to mrlube.com. Okay, let's get to my daily face-off picks today. Grady, do we have them, or I can just read them? Okay, he needs a second. No worries. What do we have next? What else do we have? Well, we've got anyone else. We'll do the DFO picks at the end. Let's do anyone else. presented by the Vancouver Canadians. Stees are on the road right now, but they're giving away 33 giveaways this season, 6 koozies giveaways for the first 6 Saturdays of the season from all their beer partners, and a giveaway every Sunday for Family Fun Sunday for kids 12 and under. Folks, the dog day of summer. Harm, I'm thinking you bring Cash, I bring Bert. We go do a pod with the dogs. Pod with the dogs, that band name. Think of going to Nat Bailey Stadium. They've got June 11th is the dog day of summer game. That's the one. That's the one you want to get to, folks. June 11th. If you're thinking about going, bring your pup. Enter on the third baseline. Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful time. I'm really looking forward to it. I'm really hopeful that I can actually make it work and that I can bring Bert. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Head on down to Nat Bailey Stadium. You can get your tickets at CanadiansBaseball.com. Okay, let's look at our chat. Let's look what we have here. A lot of interaction, a lot of talk about Martin Necas, and a lot of talk, not so much, about Jesperi Kotkaniemi, definitely more about Necas. But man, I'm happy we have this to talk about, because the more I hear you talk about it, and obviously, like, I don't watch every Carolina Hurricanes game, it really does feel like this is a trade the Canucks should be all over. Like, it almost feels like one where it's like, okay, before you make a trade with anybody else, because clearly this player doesn't want to be there, and clearly there's going to be a trade. Before you make a trade with anyone else, give us a chance to up our offer and see what we can do.
Yeah, because the alternative is, while I love a player like Nick Ehlers, and you could make the case that Ehlers is a better player than Necas, the difference isn't huge. And more importantly, you only get 1 year of Ehlers before he's a UFA, right? Like, that's what is hard to stomach, right? If you're discussing like giving up a big package and potentially having Höglander, is you're only maybe getting 1 year out of the guy before he either walks to free agency or you have to give him a big new contract. Whereas again, with Necas, he's in the perfect age range, and because he's not coming off his career best season, look, he's still going to make a handsome amount of money on his next contract. I mean, I haven't done the comps or the research yet, but number probably starts with in the high 6 range, maybe, is like my initial like spitballing, I haven't done research yet number. So it's still going to cost a pretty penny to keep him on a long-term deal, but he's in his prime, and I think that he can absolutely live up to that contract. Whereas a player hits his late 20s, he has the prospect of unrestricted free agency right on the horizon, you're going to have to pay him top dollar, and I'm a lot less confident that a player like Ehlers, for example, was going to live up to the next contract that he signs.
Sean S. wants you to talk about Colton Parayko to be Quinn Hughes' partner.
He makes too much money is the problem that I come back to. I love Parayko. I think he'd be a great partner for Hughes, more defensively oriented than offensively. He also has a lot of control over his future, I believe. I don't know if it's a no move clause or no trade clause, but he controls a lot there. I also just think that because he had a terrific bounce back season, St. Louis isn't going to be eager to move him. And by all accounts, they're not rebuilding. So I can't really see a scenario like maybe last offseason. There would have been a scenario where, okay, the Blues might be more open-minded about shopping Parayko, but he had a monster bounce back year. And because they're not rebuilding, I imagine they just want to keep him. And if anything, find the right partner for him so that he doesn't have to do it all as a number one defenseman.
Yeah, $6.5 million until the end of the 2029-2030 season, and he's got a full no trade clause until 2028-2029 when it moves to a 15-team no trade list. Necas doesn't have any trade protection on this deal, right?
No, he's an RFA anyway, so.
Okay. Don't the list still go into effect when you're an RFA?
I mean...
Oh, no, because the contract's over. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
The contract's over. Okay. Look at us. Putting our heads together. Okay. What were you gonna say?
No, nothing. All good.
You were gonna say something, Harm.
Well, I was gonna say, like, putting your heads together, like, you didn't need me to figure out, or like, I didn't bring that idea up that an RFA would have trade protection. Like, don't involve me in that in that discussion. I didn't bring that up.
Oh man, this is great. Okay, K-Town Chief. As a consistent viewer, the amount of Abby information has regressed since the loss of Chris Faber. Will Canucks Army look at how the Abby Canucks are covered going into the summer and fall? K-Town Chief, the simple answer, or Chef, excuse me. The simple answer, and I'm going to give you a straight answer, is nobody really cares about the Abbotsford Canucks anymore. Like, it's great that you do, and I do, but when the team is doing well, people care about the NHL team. And that's where we're putting most of the coverage. We're still covering the AHL team with the Farmies, and we're still going to keep that going. But personally, and I'm not trying to speak for everybody here, I love that I don't really know much about the Allsvenskan anymore. And like, I don't know anything about the third tier league in Russia anymore. I that's the thing. When you're a team that's in the playoffs, you care a lot less about your prospects because you're looking less at, okay, what's the next thing? What's the next dart that's being thrown at the wall or whatever? What's the next thing that might be able to stick? Like, we're still gonna have top of the line coverage of development camp like we always do. Because look, I take it seriously that we cover prospects. We're still gonna have the Blackfish report and all that, but like that's Dave Hall's world. We're leaving that for Dave Hall. It's not going to be the focus of many shows unless there's something actually to talk about. So obviously, Manny Malhotra, we talked about him at the start of this show, and I'm hoping to have some Abbotsford guests. It's just, simply put, very, very few people care about the farm team when the NHL team's doing well. That's just the easiest way to put it.
Yeah, and like from my perspective, I cover the main NHL team obsessively. I also cover the league as a whole, right, nationally, in terms of what I do at The Athletic, which helps inform, like, when these rumors come out, for example, like, that helps me immediately know and have some baseline level of Carolina's cap situation, their potential motivations. I'm more focused on just the NHL as a whole. Like, I would love to keep really close tabs on Abby. I just don't have the bandwidth when the NHL is like 95% of my focus.
Yeah, exactly. And we're still going to keep tabs on them. We still have people going out to all the games and stuff. And I mean, we're one of the only outlets that does that. But yeah,
that's why we have Dave Hall on the show.
That's why we have Dave Hall on the show. Tyson Cole, shout out Tyson Cole as well. He went out to Abbotsford a lot at the end of last season. He's going to be out there a lot this season. We're still going to have a lot of Abby coverage, but it's not going to be dominating shows. Like, we'll still have Abby players on because those are always fun. Like, I love our conversations with Aiden McDonough, especially. Those are always great. But yeah, we're not going to have as much Abbotsford coverage, I mean, as you saw this year. But that's good. It means the NHL team's doing well. We'll still be out there telling the stories that you guys want to hear, though. It's just that people don't want to hear as many stories from Abbotsford. They want to hear stories from the NHL team. Okay, moving on. Jeremy Lee, regular listener to the show. How much of a negative effect will the OEL penalty be on the Canucks' playoff chances next season? Harm, we have talked about this quite a bit. Next year isn't the year that it goes at its highest point, right? Like, that's the year after.
It's not. It's the year after.
Okay. What is his buyout for next year? I'll pull it up. You probably don't know.
Is 2.346. I've got it open. It's 2.346 for this coming season, which, what is that? Like a number 5-6 defenseman, or like a lower end third line forward, or a backup goaltender. It's a depth piece. It's not like a major core presence that you'd be missing out on. So I don't think it really hurts you too significantly this coming season, but it's the year after where it's the dead cap charge for him is 4.766 for 2025-26, and also the same amount for 2026-27. That's where you get into nearly $5 million. Okay, that's like a second pair defenseman. That's like a second line forward. That's a legit core piece. That's when it really hinders not maybe your playoff odds, but the idea of you want to be a sustainable cup contender. That's going to have to be something you work around. And that's why you have to be careful even around the idea of an Ilya Mikheyev buyout. And again, we'll get to it later, but when you already have to deal with nearly 4.8 million of dead cap for OEL between 2025 and 2027 for 2 seasons, to add Mikheyev's dead cap on top of that, like, that would be really difficult to navigate around. And so if I'm the Canucks and I'm looking for an exit route on Mikheyev, you'd almost look perhaps more so at retaining and trying to find a trade partner via that route.
Yeah. And, you know, like that's someone said that's Nature's money right there. That's Kotkaniemi's cap hit. Like that's Kotkaniemi's cap hit as well. Like that's what it comes down to, right? So, yeah. Okay. We'll close it at anyone else there. Before we get to our Bet365 bet of the day, I forgot to get to this. We got a quick word from the government of British Columbia.
Now for a word from helpstartshere.gov.bc.ca. Everybody knows about the overdose crisis, also known as the toxic drug crisis, but what's less known is that the stigma around addiction makes it harder to ask for help, and that's got to stop. Addiction is a complex health condition, not a choice, and that means people shouldn't have to face judgment at work or from their loved ones or fear the law. But shame and stigma can cause a person to hide their drug use or use alone, and we don't want that. People shouldn't be afraid to reach out. There are supports available, and it can help to know where to start. The government of BC is partnering with organizations like the Nation Network to help extend this message throughout our province. If you or someone you care about is struggling, you can find supports and services near you at helpstartshere.gov.bc.ca.
Okay, let's get to my daily faceoff picks here. The DFO parlay game, you can go play it at games.dailyfaceoff.com. Each game day, answer some questions. Daily winners, snag gift cards, each round's champs, pocket cash. It's free, it's fun, and it's all about hockey. Here are my picks for today. Rangers, Panthers. I'm going with the Rangers. Rangers tie up the series here. Rangers tie up the series under 5.5 total goals. First goal going to the Rangers. The third period is going to be the highest scoring period. Artemi Panarin over 0.5 assists, so he'll get an assist. Alex Barkov held off the score sheet when it comes to assists. Sam Reinhart's held off the score sheet when it comes to goals. And Artemi Panarin is going to score a goal tonight. You heard it here first, folks. Go make your own picks over at games.dailyfaceoff.com. Although I will say, Harm, it was really fun yesterday when we made the picks live on air, like the two of us. That was pretty fun. So maybe we'll do that later, but not today. Not today. I made today's picks. We'll do it for the next game with the Oilers and Stars on Monday. I think that's on Monday, right? Yeah, Monday. I think.
I don't remember the schedule.
Doesn't matter. Okay, let's get to our Bet365 bet of the day, brought to you by, you guessed it, Bet365, a proud partner of Canucks Conversation. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on a huge range of markets. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code VANBONUS when you sign up for an account. Folks, if I made it in the parlay game, I'm also making it on Bet365. I'm taking the New York Rangers, the underdog New York Rangers, to take game 2 at home at -105 odds. You can go get that over at Bet365. Must be 90 plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly. All right. We'll close it out there. Heading into the weekend, we'll be back on Monday. And then next week, we're going down to 3 shows a week, folks. We'll do emergency shows if there's like a trade, which there might be, or a signing or anything like that. We'll be sure to do emergency shows, but we're going down to 3 shows a week next week. Going to give you some solid off-season content, but we'll see. Maybe some weekend news that makes us kick our off-season preview show down the road, but we'll see. We'll see what happens this weekend, folks, and we'll be back on Monday to break it all down for you. But for now, signing off, my name is Dave Quadrelli. That is Harmon Dial. Our technical producer is Grady Sass. Thanks so much for listening to the episode of the Canucks Conversation.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.